In the beginning, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat.
No, Odysseus, let him rack his brains with you and the other captives how to fight.
Guilty.
Impossible. Trust me.
No one to weep for me, my friends. No wedding song.
Amo verumque cano, Troiae qui primus laboris Italiam
Dante ha fatto il pieno e per gli altri è rimasto ben poco, which means that Dante filled up.
I was the more deceived.
Confess that you were very bad to hurt my feelings.
Cried Candide, I'm through.
Enough. Who are you then?
Part of that force which would do evil evermore, and yet
She was eating a maraschino ice at that precise moment.
There is no
When Gregor Samsa woke up one morning, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous dung beetle.
We're laughing because we were telling jokes off camera. Welcome to lesson 20 now, class 20 in our 24-hour trip through Western literature. And it'll be our second hour now on Madame Bovary. I applaud your energy in the first hour. The last 10 minutes or so, your energy level went very high indeed, which I should tell people who are watching this carried over to the break, and I think we got our best stuff was out in the hall, but I enjoyed it very much. Let's start with questions again. Any questions you want to ask? Yeah.
Well, my question is, if she was able to find some satisfaction, gratification through other men, why didn't she turn to Charles to begin with? She never did.
Yeah, well, you guys answer that. Yeah. What you'll have to ask yourself, what exactly is she expecting and looking for in a man? And does Charles satisfy that?
But she never talked with Charles. She talked with Leon when she didn't even know him.
She was looking for excitement, and her husband was really not an exciting person. And I don't think she would have found happiness there. She was looking for another type of excitement.
Even when she was not dating, but when he came to the farm, she really didn't talk with him then. What?
Again, remind yourself of the point of view. Remind yourself that the point of view in this novel, you understand what I mean by point of view? It's the narrator's position in terms of the world of the novel. You with me on that? If you think of the novel as a circle, Flaubert had to find his angle of vision for his story, and it was not an easy one, because he wants you to see the milieu from the point of view not only of the participants, but also from the larger point of view, which will allow irony. Unless we have that larger point of view, there can be no irony, right? So think about this. Let me just pursue the idea and then I'll come back to it. So he could have chosen a first-person point of view. He could have told this entire novel from the point of view of Emma, let's say. But had he done that, how could he achieve this extraordinary irony? Emma is too limited to look at her environment from any kind of ironic detachment, right? Imagine Yonville solely from Emma's point of view. It would be a terribly limited and confining point of view. Charles is the same way. Charles is dull, he's unimaginative, he's unobservant, he's this, that, and the other thing, not a particularly good narrator. So what he does is begins with a we at the opening of the novel. This classmate of Charles is about the best we can do, right? This we who talks about Charles, then it rather imperceptibly changes from a we to a third person, right? Who looks at the farm. We then start to perceive through Charles's point of view at the farm, right? We get to see Emma. Do you notice how Emma comes to you in a series of very small, precise images? Yeah. First it's her eyes and the darkness of her eyes. Do you remember what's next? Then it's the whiteness of her nails. Remember? It's the sound of her shoes on the kitchen floor, on the stones. Exactly. It's piece by piece by piece. This is where we're viewing through Charles. Subtly, the point of view changes, and we move from the outside, if you will, in. And because what the real drama is occurring, of course, between the ears of Emma, right? So the imperceptible shift then is from Charles to Emma, and then interestingly enough, even as we see through Emma, because she is so limited and so finite, we need yet another voice, and that's the narrator's point of view up here. And it's that distance, if you will, if you stay with me spatially, it's that difference between Emma and the narrator that achieves the irony. Allison Finch was talking about that, remember, in the first hour, that you have this dull, unimaginative woman. If you see through her, obviously the language will be flat and prosaic and without detail, right? But Flaubert gives you an extraordinarily vivid style, even though you're seeing it through that point of view. Just let me conclude. What happens as we come to the end of the novel, of course, is that the perspective shifts yet again to the outside as we watch Emma die, and we're left with the, I almost want to call it an epilogue rather than a climax, of Charles's death. So you all with me with this? It's kind of an outside in, out point of view, and it's just dramatically done. Let's see, I'm going to go to Barbara first.
I haven't
Whoop.
finished.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Stop that whining.
I was going back to what Ada said. That's the reason I brought it up.
Yeah,
Her first tool after her father was Charles,
that's right.
who was willing to do anything for her and saw her as the epitome of everything. He would have done anything. If she had said after they came to the small town, you know, this isn't really what I need, Charles, move on. But she ignored him and went to two perfect, well, not perfect, but two utter strangers.
Don't you think she knows by that point? Do you remember the scene where it's still in Tostes? We haven't even gotten to Yonville yet. And remember, Charles comes back from his rounds, and he sits down to dinner with a typical dinner. I mean, guys, you've been in restaurants and see married couples who've been living together for how long? And you watch them in restaurants and they don't say a word to one another. You know what I'm talking about? Of course, this doesn't happen to us who lead incredibly stimulating lives. But these other people, but you know what I'm talking about? You'll see them sit there for an hour and not exchange a boo to one another. Remember the dinner scene when Charles comes back from his rounds and they sit down to dinner, typical dinner. Charles starts in on his soup and she just goes, oh my God. You know, the awareness that she cannot connect with this guy. It's
in fact, his contentment exasperates her.
Yeah, precisely.
Yes.
Because it's his happiness, of course, his seeming happiness, that is one of the things that spurs her to seek her own. And clearly, their two happinesses are quite different.
Well, you can back up way farther, where at the night of the wedding.
Yes.
Where, as far as we know, Emma was a virgin.
Yes,
she was inexperienced.
that's a safe assumption. Yeah.
Right, and then Charles had been married before, and he was dull the first day, the day of the ceremony and all that. But Flaubert makes the comment that the next day, Charles was the one who appeared to have lost his virginity.
That's very good. Yes, he plays with, good for you, that's a good detail. You know, do you notice that Flaubert plays with the notion of gender frequently in the novel? You might even say, when you come to the end of the novel, it's and you should say it actually, it's Emma seducing Léon, and it's Emma who is the one who becomes the kind of man in the relationship, and Léon is the kind of traditional female in the relationship. Yeah, it's really quite dramatic. Now, what's his point there? Well, I think obviously one of his points is something we were talking about in the first hour, that notion of stereotypes, the notion that Flaubert is trying to explode those orthodoxies with which we view the world. It's central to the novel.
We never do know how Emma felt about that wedding night.
That's correct.
We don't know how she really felt about. She doesn't comment about how she feels about her husband sexually, but he continues to be delighted with the whole relationship that way, as with every other way.
Let me ask you. Well, we started to talk about it in the first hour, and we'll return to it now. Charles we keep circling around Charles, and we keep saying he's dull, and he is, and that he's prosaic, and he is, and he's gray, and he is. Is he good?
Yeah. I think you don't like him.
He's a good man, huh? Emma, at the end, one of her last words is, "Oui, tu es bon."
I think, in a
Yes,
way,
you are
his
good.
his one problem was he was within himself too. He didn't really see into his wife's own problems, and to me that was one of his failings, that he
A
didn't,
lack of imagination.
right, he did not comprehend that she was maybe as unhappy as she was, or even attempt to maybe make himself part, this meeting of making each other happy. He
Yeah.
didn't attempt that either.
So you feel he's a good man being unjustly punished? Yeah.
I feel Charles was a nice man, but not necessarily a good man.
Yeah, I do want you to
He wasn't
define
a large
the
enough
terms.
man to be good.
Oh, yeah, what do you mean by that?
Good including all of the things that weren't there for Emma. Part of the irony looking at Emma's limitations is that she looked at Charles and saw him as being limited in the same way. At the risk of oversimplifying, the question came up a little earlier about why Emma married Charles if she didn't love him. She was bored on the farm. He was a way to escape the boredom, but turned out to be as boring as the farm. Didn't have any more to offer her outside of the farm than the farm did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the lack of his expansiveness, the lack of his ability to dream her dream, the lack of his ability to provide an intellect for her to reach for, that put him in a position of being someone she couldn't turn to. And, I think he was a nice man, but to me, a good man has to have some kind of a breadth beyond the
That's an
niceness
interesting point.
of
So
the
he's too limited a human being for you to be morally serious? That is, I can't say good or bad man with Charles because he's not of a certain stature?
But he
I'm asking you a difficult question. I'm asking you a very difficult
that
question.
puts it in the realm of whether or not we want to judge either
Yes.
Charles or
Yes.
Emma, and I don't
Yes.
think I do.
Okay, all right.
He had high
Valeria?
aspirations too, because when he undertook this surgery on Justin's leg, he thought, this will really make him in the field of medicine. I mean,
He
I
got
think
talked into that.
He got taught, yeah. He really,
No, but
yeah.
he didn't say no. I think he liked the idea that this might elevate his position in the community.
And it would please his wife.
Right.
Yeah.
Charles never exerted himself in the marriage part. I thought he was just kind of happy and sat there, and that's not the way in my mind a marriage works.
Yeah, okay. Peter, let me hear from a man.
He always, but just in terms of this goodness, he always chose the easy path. The father kind of pushed him along.
Yeah.
And he really didn't become a true full-fledged doctor. He was a health officer or
That's
whatever.
correct.
And even this incident with the operation, that was just something he got pushed into. He really, wouldn't have thought of that on his own, wouldn't have done it on his own, but he was just kind of trying to please other people.
Yeah, he's not an ambitious man at all, of course. And he's not going to be Emma's entree into the world which she wishes to inhabit, the world of the ball. Remember the scene at the ball? That's the world she wants to live in. She wants to live in the world of the opera house at Rouen. She wants to be in a different social class. And the husband, Charles, is not going to get her there. Yeah.
But Charles is loyal.
Yes, he is.
He's honored. He's loyal. He worships the ground she walks on. He's industrious in his work, such as it is.
Yeah.
He is ethical. He honors his mothers to a fault.
He'd make a great Boy Scout.
A great Boy Scout. He is everything Emma is not.
That's right.
I would suggest, and that's part of her irritation with him, and it's back to this garden business again. She cannot appreciate what she has, and does not really appreciate him in full until on her deathbed, if that, to the fullness she's capable of. And whatever Charles is not in her mind, she did not find, and going outside of her marital situation to find it. It isn't what she wanted anyway. Well, bottom line.
Yeah, clearly he has wonderful qualities. I mean, there obviously is no doubt about it. However, those are not the qualities that she happens to be valuing at that particular point. And that's why I agree with you when you say be careful of judging here. I'm not at all sure Flaubert wants you judging, and I have a feeling that's what got him in so much trouble with this novel, is there was no authorial voice other than the ironic one, which does judge. Let's not mislead ourselves. That voice, that Flaubertian voice that intrudes in the narrative, does judge, to be sure. And the irony is a kind of judgment, to be sure. But there is no explicit place in the novel where one says, aha, she is being punished for such and such. And let me illustrate it. What is she being punished for? What undoes her? Is it her adulteries?
No.
That's another one of the marvelous ironies. She's an untidy housekeeper. She can't keep the books. That's what undoes her. Interesting, right? It's not the adulteries that do her in. It's LaRue. Yeah, it's LaRue, the shopkeeper. Yeah.
It's interesting that she would consider that she would be, to have to go to the point of committing suicide over being a debtor and not being able to have the money and the means, that's the reason she, in my mind, that she committed suicide, not because of the affairs.
Yeah, there's no way out for her. Yeah. And it's interesting that the will, we talked earlier about her will, you'll notice that she's surrounded in Yonville by wills stronger than her own. You with me? LaRue's will is considerably stronger than Emma's. Rudolph's will is stronger than Emma's. Homais' will may be the strongest in the entire town.
Well, even Charles's will is stronger than hers.
Yes, I suppose so, although we don't see a conflict in the two. That is, they really... well, tell me what you mean by...
Well, behaviorally, there's a great conflict.
Yes, of course.
Behavioral, inside.
There's a great difference.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah,
she's living an entirely different life than what she's living by what anybody who looked at her through much of the novel.
Yeah.
Just being the perfect... She began to realize she had some maybe inappropriate feelings for, or pleasurable feelings for Leon. She responded to that by resuming her previous wonderful housewifery. And she did, I mean, as far as Charles was concerned, I don't know why, but everything's great. You know, his nightcaps were all stacked up, his laundry was done, his meals were great again. Like she was doing, I don't know exactly, I didn't understand that part of her response actually, but that's what she did. And they describe at great length, the author does, just how wonderful a wife she was in that period. And yet you turn right around at the end of that discussion and he describes the devastation that's inside of her.
Yeah. Well, one of the things she's doing, of course, is assuaging a certain kind of guilt. You'll notice that she does, somebody said manic depressive, somebody said that in the earlier, yeah. And there is almost that kind of peak and valley nature to, even to her adulteries, yeah.
Yes, but...
Yeah.
She became interested in Charles when she thought he was going to be successful with the surgery.
Oh, yeah.
And then she thought, I thought that she saw her way out because she became passionate about men who were making something of themselves. That's why she wasn't, in my opinion, interested in Leon at the beginning, because he was young and he really hadn't done anything. She became interested in him at the end when he had a job out of the little provincial town.
Yeah, yeah.
He did have an active, he had a major role in her fantasy life.
I thought
she shared a sensibility with Leon early.
Had he stayed, I think things would have developed on that first relationship maybe.
There would have been a safe outlet for her romantic sensibilities.
There would have been something happening.
The description of when she's at the window watering her plants and he's opposite watering his, and the electricity between the two, you know, it's like a clandestine meeting. And you were talking about the window theme going through it.
Yeah.
But what I'd like to know is, are we going to discuss the Flaubert's description of the people who inhabit that town, the shopkeeper,
Absolutely.
the nursemaid.
Yeah.
I mean, the grimness of some of these people's lives and the connivance of some of the others.
Oh, yeah.
But the main sin that Emma had, I feel, was she was found out. That was the problem with the debt. Once it became known, she was devastated. It wasn't that other people weren't having affairs, but nobody talked about it, you see. So that as long as it didn't become a common point of gossip, it didn't really affect her.
Sins are not sins until they're spoken. Yeah.
Yes, but when she meets, was it Benet? And she knows that he knows.
Yes.
And she says, and he's not going to keep his mouth shut.
Yeah.
Right.
Now everybody will know.
Yeah.
And so she didn't have that private.
Ironically, he did keep his mouth shut.
That was not until the
Yes.
end.
Yeah, but she didn't expect it. As far as she was concerned, that window was open now.
Yeah.
How many of you see this as a feminist novel?
What do you mean? What do you mean?
No, don't do that. No, don't do that. Yeah. Does he view the world? Is he able to view the world sympathetically from a woman's perspective? Peter, boy, I gotta get.
Just the evidence to the fact that it's a feminist novel was the intensity of the discussion within this group at the end of the last hour. It aroused all the passions of the women in this group.
Yeah. All right. Yes. All right. Others. Yeah.
But if you mean by a feminist novel advocating the female and favoring the female, then that really...
I don't mean that.
You don't mean that.
No.
Pro-female.
Yeah.
You don't mean that.
Yeah. No. I don't mean female as triumphing hero in the tale, which is true of lots of feminist literature, to be sure, but would not have been believable in a 19th century provincial fiction.
Odds and
exactly.
even
Exactly.
personal odds.
No, what I mean is, does he capture a feminine sensibility? Does he say something about what it is or was to be a female? Talk to me about that.
And the response that he got personally from women who identified and who
it was quite strong, actually. Yeah, he got it right, huh? Yeah.
Well, first.
And her tragedy,
I'm sorry, I can't see you behind.
She wanted more than the traditional parochial environment that she was in.
Yes.
And I think in that way, it speaks to feminism. And they want more than the boundaries that are set up by men in society.
It's partly what's so terrible about Emma's fate, isn't it? That I had said earlier in the first hour that if she were a male, or if she were more creative, she might have found ways to transcend her dilemma, or at least to solve some of her problems, but she does not have the avenues available.
If she had a female counterpart to talk over these things, there were a section when she wanted to talk to her maid and then she dismissed it, she wouldn't understand.
Yeah, she can't find a kindred sensibility in that town other than Léon.
We shouldn't condemn her for her incompleteness because of what she was surrounded with and the boundaries, she couldn't go beyond that.
Yes, I agree. That's again why I hit that point of be careful of judging her. Yes. Yeah, her incompleteness is not of her making.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that as the doctor's wife in that little town, she rather enjoyed special status and was deferred to on that level. Who would she confide to that would not affect her status in that town? She really didn't have a peer.
No, she didn't have anybody. You're right. Yeah, she was alone. If the tape is ready, if the videotape is ready, I talked to Allison Finch at Jesus College about exactly this question, and let's see what she has to say about whether this is a feminist novel and his sympathy to the feminine character. Some people think that Flaubert was a feminist, or at least was sympathetic to a feminist point of view. Talk to me about that.
I think that Flaubert is a feminist, but he is also very anxious to show the ways in which men are not liberated. So in that sense, he is trying to explode stereotypes that both sexes have about each other and about themselves. And that paragraph where Emma is exploring internally the reasons why she would like to give birth to a boy rather than to a girl is extremely significant. She thinks she would like a boy because men at least are free, but then we see her going in for all kinds of fantastic notions of why it is men are free. She thinks that they're free to travel all over the world, free to have as many passions as they might like. She then thinks it's no good being a woman because women are too subject to the softnesses of the flesh. They can't do anything, they're restricted. They're even legally restricted. Now, obviously, Flaubert is onto something important there, and Emma, you could say, is onto something important there, because there are various legal restrictions, and were even more so then, that apply to women more than to men. But Flaubert is trying to show that really, in the kind of society we live in, and that Emma lived in, neither men nor women were free. So in that sense, he's a feminist, but whatever the equivalent would be, an andrist, I don't know. And I think also Flaubert can be thought of as a feminist in that in the very characters he creates, he is anxious to show that men can have feminine traits, that women can have masculine traits, and that's particularly the case with Emma herself. She takes on certain masculine traits as the novel goes on, and that comes out very noticeably in the affair with Léon, where Flaubert actually says at a certain point, it was as if she was the man and he was the woman. But there are many other places where Flaubert makes similar suggestions.
Is the novel meant to be instructive? Is there a moral here in this novel? Was that part of Flaubert's purpose?
I think if there is an instruction in it, it is to be alive to ambiguity, to try to get away from cliché, from the received idea. Flaubert was very keen on exploring received ideas. I mean, as you know, he wanted to write a dictionary of received ideas. So I think if there is an instruction in it, it would be that, yes.
And be careful of orthodoxy?
Yes, orthodoxies of all kinds, whether religious, political, although one can see in Flaubert's novels, I think, a slight leaning towards liberalism, if you like. I don't know whether one could describe that as an orthodoxy, but yes, certainly orthodoxies of all kinds.
How about his attitude toward provincial life? It seems almost viciously satirical in the novel.
Well, he's not the only French writer to have been viciously satirical about provincial life. In fact, I think, you know, going right the way back to the 17th century in French literature, one can see portrayed a divide between the capital and the provinces, and the provinces are described as a desert even way back in the 17th century. So one can see Flaubert as fitting into a certain tradition, if you like, in French literature in that respect. But certainly he is vicious about the kinds of narrow-mindedness that one may find in the provincial clergy, the provincial scientist, if you like. Whether he is more vicious about them than he would be if they were, as it were, situated in Paris is perhaps a difficult question, but you're thinking more of the kinds of boredom, the kinds of ingrownness that one finds in the provinces in particular.
Yes, and the will to despoil her in Leroux, and the kind of crushing stupidity of the parish priest Bournicien. She was kind of unlucky, wasn't she?
Yes, she was, but one would have to say then that she would not have been ineluctably drawn to unscrupulous people if she'd been in a town, or ineluctably drawn perhaps to a priest who wouldn't have been able to answer her questions or even understand them, let alone answer them. So again, I think it's a very rich ambiguity in the novel. Was she unlucky, or would this have happened to her anywhere?
Yeah, that was a nice discussion, wasn't it? She's very to the point in her responses. Anything you want to respond to that she said?
Well, the last statement wouldn't happen anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. That she's drawn, and again, the point she makes repeatedly is because she views her reality from, as she put it in this interview, from received ideas. It's almost as if her lack of imagination is her determinism. You understand what I'm saying? That no matter where she goes, well, let me try this a different way. There are a number of kinds of cliched received ideas that many of us still live by. Time will bring change for the better. Change of place might bring change for the better. You hear what I'm saying? But of course what you do, and it doesn't take you very long to work this out, is you bring this self with you when you change place, and you bring this self with you when you change time. Emma is wrong on both those counts. She thinks changing place will bring her happiness, and she thinks time will bring her happiness. And she's wrong on both counts because she's bringing that same limited perspective with her wherever she goes. She is, in a sense, condemned to be herself for the rest of her life.
And Flaubert projects his own sensibilities onto her, so as a man he could show his feminine side, projecting it onto Emma.
Well, that's interesting you say that because he talks about that in his letters. In his letters to Louise Collet, he talks about exactly that, about having to become feminine, about having to kind of plug in, as we would say, to his.
And today it's a prevalent view that men are going out in the woods and beat the drums and find their own nature.
Yes, that's a bit.
For the feminine side to.
The Iron John stuff, that's a bit extreme. Barbara?
Well, she aspired to a level that she never could achieve. She aspired to the aristocracy. And in those times, that was her ultimate, her dream. But she could have made more with what she had, and she could have done a lot more with her marriage and with Charles. He was a willing pupil to her. She could have enlarged their horizons through the marriage as a couple, but she didn't. Even at the end, when she dies and he prepares for the funeral, he gives her all the niceties in the velvet coverlet, and he dresses himself up. So even in death, he becomes what he thinks that maybe she wanted him to be.
But he's giving physical things.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, but that's what that's what moves her, isn't it? Yeah, isn't that what excites her about the ball? Is all of the sense impressions of the ball, right? The sense that these somehow bestow on the individual something meaningful. And indeed, if you think about this, she does this throughout her career. And indeed, it's because of this that LaRue can do to her what he does, because she's convinced that by changing the trappings, she can change the reality. By changing the surface appearance of things, she can change the reality. And I think that's nowhere better seen than in the cigar box that she finds on the side of the road. Remember the cigar box that she finds after the ball? And she's convinced it belongs to a count. And she holds it and looks at it, remember? And it becomes this almost talismanic thing which bestows upon her a kind of grace and a kind of elegance that she doesn't otherwise have. This is starting to sound very modern to me.
Yeah, she brings the wine.
Yeah.
That was quite a scene too.
Yeah.
The way she relishes it sensually, as if she is drinking the whole scene in.
And perhaps I talked about windows in the first hour. That marvelous scene where she turns to the window, and who does she see with their faces pressed up against the window but the peasants? Remember that at the ball? And they're separated by the window, and now Emma is on the inside looking out. Yeah, she likes that very much. Yeah.
The author makes the point too, though, that I think this is early on. She had no use for anything that didn't provide instant grat.
Yes. Yep.
Very much oriented to what's pleasurable right now.
Right.
And then your point, Phyllis, about wanting to be inside the firework. To be satisfied, she possibly would have liked a life where The firework was always going off, and she was always in the middle of it.
Yes. In many ways, that's a good point about time, because she does live in a perpetual present. That's one of the reasons, again, why LaRue can despoil her the way he does, is because she doesn't worry about the future. That's, you know, that's the future. There's a kind of childlike quality to Emma. It's typical of the child to live in a perpetual now, to have no sense of having come from anything, and certainly, you know, for a child, next week is the the end of time, you know. So they live in that constant now, and Emma was very much that way, living in a constant now. Yeah.
And perhaps she typified someone who's living in a dream rather than someone who has a dream.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah. If she has a dream, it does seem to be it's stereotypical. Yes, it's hardly her dream. I prefer to put it that way. It's hardly her dream. It is a dream of received idea, as Allison Finch points out.
It's kind of like her own movie superimposed on compilations of everything she's gotten. Impressions from books, other people, the sort of life like from commercials.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I agree with you. Good for you. Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. Yeah, it's as if she's edited somebody else's movies and made them her own, made them her dreams. But they're not hers. Yeah, right.
But even when she went to school and she was a good student, you know, and she was singled out and given all kinds of privileges and wonderful things to read, we'll assume, but the parts that she built her life on weren't the wonderful things to read. Yeah. They were the pulp magazines or whatever that the old maid school teacher had and made available to the girls.
Right.
Those were where she took her dreams, not anything substantive that she was exposed to in her environment, and that was choice.
Clearly, that was part. Yeah. Look, we will talk about those other characters, but I'm reminded that the tone of the narrator and the point of view of the narrator has an ability to distance us from these characters. That is, we read about Emma and we are really kind of looking down from above at her, even as we enter her consciousness. And would you agree with me that throughout the novel we say, this may be true of Emma, but not of us? We don't do this. We don't. It's so easy to see her romantic reading in the novels and in the pulps of the day, leading to this false dream. And it's so easy for us to see that she's a spark of poetry in the dull ennui of Yonville, and we can see all of these things, but we don't apply this stuff to ourselves. And yet the famous line that Flaubert is Madame Bovary, c'est moi. And I'm wondering, I want you guys to kind of react to this now, not on an ideological level, but almost on a personal level. Who of us in here is not wrapped up in received ideas? Who of us in here is not wrapped up in orthodoxies that were foisted on us? I mean, you can say that my sense of the family, one of my senses of the family, was my choice, because I chose to watch Ozzie and Harriet and Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and all of that sort of stuff. But I really didn't. I mean, that stuff was in the air, you know? That's where the sense of the family, you know, and that's where the sense of the family came from. And my father would occasionally drink too much and whack me upside the head, and Ozzie never did that. Ozzie was in a cardigan sweater at the malt shop, for God's sake, you know? You understand what I'm trivializing here, but you get my point. That I think for this novel really to work is for it to be instructive, but not instructive in the kind of 19th century moralism sense. Don't commit adultery or you'll die of unhappiness. You know, that's what the readers wanted. That's why this thing was so controversial, you know. A woman with sexual desires, and acting on them, you know, no good at all. She must be punished, you know. And the irony, of course, is, yeah, she's punished, but it ain't for that, you know.
That's probably what made people mad.
Yeah.
A very different type of question.
Yeah.
In the context of Flaubert's writing of the novel, do you know whether he came up in his letters with the Madame Bovary, c'est moi before or after he constructed the last sentences to each one of the chapters?
Well, you're not going to like this answer, but we don't even know if he ever said it. The line comes, I'm quite serious, the line comes from...
It was not in a letter.
The line comes from a writer don't get me on dates here, but some 10 or 15 years after Flaubert's death who says he said that. So we don't really know.
The reason I ask is that I see in those lines an abrupt refocusing for the reader, calling our attention to the writer as the narrator, calling our attention to ourselves in looking at it. And I'm wondering, how much part of the flow of the creation of the novel at the time, or how much part of the revision?
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, I can tell you that what he wanted ideally was for you not to be able to say that. He wanted you, and by that I mean he really wanted the author to be quite invisible. It's not like, one of the things that separates romantic art from realist art, as you probably know, is the presence of that I, that writer in the work. You read Rousseau's Confessions, for example, perhaps a classic romantic piece, and it's all about the inner eye of the writer. As you move into realism, the writer, they're trying to achieve, with the rise of science and everything, they're trying to achieve an objectivity. So what happens is the writer kind of disappears from the work, and you're not to be aware of that authorial voice. Of course you are in Flaubert. That's one of the geniuses of Flaubert. Yeah. No, I think it's more than that, but you're right. I mean, he does do climactic sentences for sure. But you are aware of that voice. It's not as obtrusive, I think, as some narrative voices. But if you were not aware of that, you would not be aware of the irony. So your point is a good one. But I wish I knew for sure that he had said Madame Bovary, c'est moi. But everybody believes he did, so that's good enough for me.
For a great piece of literature to work, can't you have that say, it's me. I understand all of this. It's part of me.
Yeah. Frequently it is. Yeah, you do need to make exactly that connection. Sometimes, however, that connection, and this is why I think Madame Bovary is a particularly strong novel, and I'll say the same about Dostoevsky and Tolstoy next week, is that it becomes something very personal because realism deals with the commonplace. And very different, isn't it, from, where will I go for this? Very different from Oedipus and Antigone and Iliad and people who were so much larger than life. These people are as small as daily life, Yeah.
You couldn't say Achilles, c'est moi.
Yeah, no, you have a hard time. Good for you. Yeah. Achilles, c'est moi just doesn't have it, doesn't it? Although, of course, you do recognize, you recognize his humanity, to be sure, but the identification clearly is not where you can say, he is me.
That's because we can't say that, but I think we even said in that class that we can see elements of our society that would say that exact thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that's why every one of these has been pertinent to today.
Yeah, let's talk about that a bit. Let's put Emma in the 20th century. Let's take this story and go, we're going to take it out of provincial France and we're going to put it into modern America. Do you think this story maintains its vitality?
Oh, yes.
We're still suffering the same delusions?
At least through the 50s. When I'm thinking the crossover from the 50s and the 60s with the real development of the feminist movement. That you had the television programs, you had the House in the Suburbs and the Wife in the Suburbs, her newer place, which was the right place to be.
Right.
But at any rate, that was you think in terms of just a simple thing like the right to vote. The whole period there from whenever Flaubert wrote this novel, I think through the 50s, makes this thing all very contemporary.
Yeah. And that dislocation we're going through now, both on an individual and on a societal level, makes the identification more difficult? Yeah, because there's not that stability. I wonder about that.
Well, let's say that now she would probably get a divorce.
Right.
And she might have more than one. Because she was a serious woman, she might marry each of her lovers and move on.
Or not.
Or not. Yeah, but either way.
Or not.
She would have the affairs. The milieu would probably be more likely to be the tube, because not that many people read that much anymore. So substitute that for her other.
But the girls do read, and this is pretty screwy stuff. But I did a program back on my host campus on the emerging adolescent female, and having a daughter who just turned 14, I had experienced this at 11 and 12, where they suddenly want to read 17 and YW or YM or and it's one makeup ad after the next, and it's pretty scary stuff.
This is a university, and on my lunch hour, I can go through the TV lounge here, and I won't call names, but there's faculty and staff watching soap operas.
Yeah.
So, this is this living in vicariously the lives of the rich and famous, and all there's no poor people in soap operas.
So what's happening? We're losing a sense of authenticity. We're leading.
I think we're in a period of upheaval. Well, I guess we've always been in a period of upheaval, actually, but yeah, authenticity is a good point. At least it seems like in our time, people are beginning to look a little more inside, and at the same time trying to look outside, trying to figure out what's real, and also ask the question, what is it that I want?
Yeah. See, when I turn to this novel and I look for authenticity, if I look for someone who's living a life not wrapped up in orthodoxies, not stereotypically sleepwalking through life, who do I find? Homais is the bourgeois progressive. He stands for all of those guys with faith in science, faith in reason, faith in progress. He's a forerunner, I suppose, of our Babbitt, our great American invention. Rah rah rah, lots of zip. Let's keep moving. Bournisien is the opposite end of that debate in the 19th century between science and religion. Bournisien is so wrapped up in his little orthodoxies and his little conventional cliches that he cannot recognize the actuality of other selves. You with me so far? Here are the two ends of one spectrum. Homais, who seems to be the very representative of the spirit of Yonville and the spirit of his age, the triumph of the middle class and all of that sort of stuff, is totally blind to the actuality of other selves, right? I mean, talk about an egoist. Goodness gracious, Bournisien, the embodiment of religion, on the other hand, a religion that cannot reach out to anyone, a religion that is so wrapped up in its formalities, no different, if you will, from the ball at Vaubyessard, all formality, all wrapped up in ritual, that it can't reach out to anyone. And I'm going, where the heck where's the positive in all of this?
I don't think well, one could talk about the cutting edge of people who are up on going inside and advancing in consciousness. But there are hundreds of orthodoxies. I mean, just think of the 100+ ethnic groups in Chicago. I have a proposition, picture Madame Bovary not committing suicide, but being caught in, say, an earlier part of the century. She would not get divorced. She would be trapped in perhaps an ethnic culture. Wanting to do the marriage thing right, fix, keep the house, for all practical purposes, it looks okay, but actually it isn't. She's not communicating. Right. She can't connect with anyone or anything, and she has nowhere to turn. And
she could take courses at GSU today.
That's right.
Yeah. But that's today.
She could, but I think that we can't ignore that there are all kinds of traps and orthodoxies even as we speak. Right. And I really, I really know this person.
Yeah, sure. I do too. Yeah, sure. And I think we all do.
And that's part of the same moi.
And that person really doesn't think of taking, not to be cruel, but that person does not think of taking a class at GSU even as a possibility.
And life is a trap everywhere you turn.
And so happiness is an invention of the devil to make people miserable. Now let me continue with the idea. So ennui is the normal state of things. And that what we need to do is learn how to live with that, not to create fictions which suggest that that's not the reality. I'm playing a nasty little game with you right now because I'm setting you up for a couple of things. But it does become an interesting, that's an interesting question I just asked you, is whether the real lesson in life is to learn to live with ennui, to know that that's the natural condition, not happiness, and that you take your happiness when you can.
Too. You could still have your dreams, too.
Well, and then what function do those dreams perform?
Well,
they're nurturing, yes?
Yes.
They're not necessarily destructive. I keep hearing, well, it's got nothing to do with reality. You know, we got to face reality. We got to see reality clearly. You know, if we did that, Willy Loman would never get in his car in the morning and go out and try to make a sale. You know, he does it knowing he's going to get his butt kicked every time he goes out there, but he dreams that tomorrow will be better. Is tomorrow going to necessarily be better? Of course not. Sure.
Okay, I was wondering, we were talking about the fleeting nature of Madame Bovary and how she never seems to find contentment in anything.
Yeah.
What are the possibility that she's only content when she's miserable?
Yes.
You know,
yes. You're not the first to say that. Oh,
the orthodoxy that binds her and is the source of her suffering is also, in a sense, a source of comfort for her, because she's so used to being miserable and always dreaming for something else, that when the opportunity comes for her to actually achieve that, she somehow sabotages that, so that she will never leave that certain, I guess, comfort zone that she's grown so used to.
That's a very interesting observation, isn't it? Yeah, I'm so happy you made that, because there are any number of people who've said, Emma's a masochist.
That's why I was thinking, I feel that now in my life. I question myself, why am I so undisciplined in certain areas? Why don't I pursue certain avenues? And I know if I did, you know, I would probably be much happier than I am now, but yet at the same time, something is holding me back.
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it, to go out. It's very difficult, A, to recognize the orthodoxies within which you are wrapped. But then B, and perhaps this is our social dislocation right now, it's very, very difficult to step outside of those things when you recognize them, you know? André Gide, do you know about André Gide, who comes some 30 or 40 years after Flaubert, writes about the need to go out into the desert as the kind of necessary journey that you have to take. You know in the Christian myth, Christ goes out into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights.
Dark night of the soul.
Precisely. But the desert becomes an interesting metaphor, very different from the garden metaphor, because in the desert, there's no nurturing. There's not in the traditional view of the desert. We do know that flowers bloom and all that sort of stuff, but you're with me. The desert we're talking about is a blank, empty landscape. And what is it a metaphor for? It's a metaphor for getting outside of all those support structures that have nurtured you and given your life meaning, but they've given them to you. They are the received ideas. And for there to be authenticity in life, you got to get outside of those structures. You've got to leave the family. You've got to leave the school. You've got to leave the government. You understand where I'm going with this? All these things that have their ideologies, you've got to get outside them, and you've got to win to some kind of authenticity. Part of the journey of going out into the desert, of course, is coming back from the desert into civilization. So yes, Chad, you're absolutely right. I mean, we recognize that we're wrapped up in all sorts of things. And don't you know better than I do, it gets harder as you get older. You know, it gets harder as you get older because of a variety of things, responsibilities, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, your point is very well taken. And what's particularly awful about Emma, as you point out, is that the one man in the novel with whom she thinks she could be the most happy is the one who abuses her the most. It's Rodolphe. Now, you were going to make a point, and I never let you make it.
One of the striking similarities for me was that I think that if we brought Emma into the 20th century, particularly the early part of the 20th century, we'd find her in a room with yellow wallpaper.
Oh, yeah. Everybody gets that, I hope. Yeah. All right, Ada, you were going to make?
I was thinking that I think, if anything, if we find life all desert or all gardens, I think we would each wind up being some variant of Emma, that in reality life is a mixture of things. And it's like we have the responsibility of weaving or making our own quilt, as it were, our life being represented by that quilt. And the pieces we choose to put it together is determined how rich or how full or how much we enjoy and what makes us happy. And that's rather self-determined. And I think maybe a lesson here is that we have to accept some boredom in life and accept some unhappiness, but through those things we also learn to enjoy our highs in our life and other things. And we grow. As we grow, we are better able to deal with it. It's how we live our lives too.
Yeah.
What I was going to say earlier, and of course now we're past that point, but I felt that Flaubert gave her an opportunity to find contentment when he gave her a child.
Yes.
If she had poured her dreams into raising this child and giving her everything that was the fairy tale, what she could have done, her husband would have allowed it, and pampered the child, but the child took her away from her own her self-concentration. But he gave her that opportunity, and it could have been very rich and very saving for her also.
Yes. I think you put your finger on the problem for her, and it's that selfishness, that inability. Had it been a boy, would it have been different? You know, well, of course we don't know. We're asking about, King Lear's childhood here. But she longed for a boy and got a girl, and it is hard for us to be terribly sympathetic with Emma in her treatment of that baby.
Yeah, She has a moment when she recognizes she's thinking about her own childhood.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden she's really contrite. She runs out, gets her daughter, hugs her and kisses her, cleans her up, changes her underwear, fixes her all up, then sends her off with the nurse again.
That's right, with the nurse manager, right?
The other question, when she had her with the wet nurse, who had the child in squalor all day.
That's correct.
Leon went with her that time. He couldn't believe it. In fact, he looked at her and she was embarrassed, but then she just kind of brushed it off, and then he ended up doing the same.
The baby becomes more an inconvenience to her than anything else, and as you point out, keeps her from perhaps discovering something about selfless love, which she might have learned both from her daughter, quite frankly, and from her husband, if either of them could have articulated it. But the problem, of course, is neither of them could articulate it. We have only a minute left. I got it.
Is part of her agony the feeling that she's alone in this misery, that no one else in the world feels like she does?
Well, yeah, of course, that's part of the trap of the inarticulate, is not to know the commonality of human experience. I mean, what was the movie? There's a movie out now where, the Shadowlands, where Warnie Lewis Mrs. Davidson says, husband said, we read to keep from being alone, and it's a marvelous expression, isn't it? Yeah. And we're at a time, this is terrible, isn't it? We should have done 5 hours on Madame Bovary. We just have light stuff next time, Crime and Punishment, Death of Ivan Ilyich. We'll see you next time.
We have 2 of them next
time.
No, just one.
Crime and Punishment is...
Yeah, we're going to do them both.